Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. Great to see everyone. I'm doing something a little different today. I've got a new piece of newfangled technology here. Adam, thanks for the recommendation. And this is actually an anniversary gift that Chelsea got for me. But it is a new piece of technology. So I also have my printed notes. I was talking to Angela Katai last week after church. I was so impressed by Brian Foy last week. And, he gets up here and he doesn't have his notes, right? And he still gives a great sermon. And I was telling Angela that if that had been me, if I'm on the way to church and I realize I don't have my notes, I'm just going to miss the exit and keep going. I wouldn't do that. It would be a single car accident. All right, so let's get right to it here. I've got a rhetorical question, rhetorical meaning no response necessary. Got a little feedback going on.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Rhetorical question. Do you feel like you have good judgment? Good judgment. Do you feel like you're able to properly judge situations that arise in your life? Do you think you're a good judge of character? You know what's funny? I don't know that I've ever talked to someone that said, oh no, I'm not a good judge of character. Everyone thinks, you might be trying to be humble, well, everyone thinks they're a good judge of character, right? So here's a question, or the next question. Let's say you're a good judge of character. Do you also, if someone asks, well, are you judgmental? Do you think you're judgmental? Now I'll spare you the definition slide. It's like, this is going to be a first. I do have slides, but not this time, not a definition slide. What's the difference between being a good judge of character and being judgmental? Well, Merriam, the Webster Dictionary just says that someone that's judgmental it's just harsh judgment. Harsh. So, where are you on that line? Good judge of character, or are you judgmental? It's like there's a spectrum there, right? There have been, anecdotally, if you talk to non-Christians, people outside of the church, there's been a lot of criticism over the years that Christians, specifically, are judgmental. We're judgmental people, right? In fact, the Barna Group, which is just a research group, they did a study in 2007, and they did a poll and survey, and they did a bunch of research, and they found out the top negative perceptions that non-Christians have of Christians. So now that I've given you the introduction, here's the softball question. What do you think the number one was? Number one negative perception. We're judgmental. Just for fun, what do you think the second negative perception was? Damn. So this doesn't look very good. We're hypocritical, we're judgmental. Okay, I just tried to turn the page and it worked. Yes. So to back up this story, or to back up that claim, I'll share a personal story of mine from back when Chelsea and I were dating. This is about 20 years ago. And back at that time, I didn't have this. So I had an old school alarm clock. And when the alarm clock would go off, it wasn't a buzzer. I had it tuned to a radio talk show. And the reason I did is because I'm really bad at getting out of bed. But if I can hear people joking and laughing, I'll start listening, and the next thing you know, I pop up. So I don't want to mention the DJ's name or the talk show or the station or anything. They're not on the air anymore. But it probably wasn't the most edifying talk show, right? But I'm listening to it. And they had a really bad habit of sometimes they were obviously not Christian, and they would sometimes make fun of Christians. And one day, this young lady, about 18, I think she said she was 18-year-old teenager, she was still in high school, she called in. And I don't know why on earth she's calling into the show to say this, but she told them that her and her boyfriend had committed to each other, that they were going to wait until marriage. And this DJ just made fun of her, laughed at her, the whole group there, they just made her feel like nothing. And this made me extremely angry. I mean, blood-boiling angry. In part because Chelsea and I were dating. We had made the same commitment to each other, to God. So I was super angry. And back then, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook. I didn't know where. I want to yell at this. I just want to do something. So what I did was I decided, you know what? I'm going to tell all my Christian friends that that radio station is awful. You shouldn't listen to them. I'm going to start a campaign. And it turns out that very night, or it might have been the next night, I'm losing track of time, Chelsea and I got invited to this little dinner party, and there was a handful of people there. And now these weren't people we knew well. They were acquaintances at best. And I got my opportunity. And I was still mad about it, right? So I'm like, I'm going to share this news. And I'm not proud of this, but I don't even know what I said. I'm sure I used the word sin, sinner, just went off on this guy. And one of the girls that was there, once I kind of calmed down and stopped talking, I don't like to talk, by the way, that's why I'm up here. I could immediately tell she was very upset with me. She was offended, very offended with me that I went off on this DJ. And she then went off on me. Real Christians are not judgmental. Real Christians don't judge. You shouldn't judge. That's not right. Who are you to say that? Who are you to call, who are you to say that? So because I could tell that I offended her, I decided, you know what? I'm not going to fight. I'm going to just leave it at that. Leave it at that. So the experience really caused it, and I'll come back and tell you the rest of the story here in a minute, but the experience really caused me to kind of pause and think, was I being judgmental? Was I wrong? What did I do wrong in that situation? What could I have done better in that situation? And what I have since found is that if you go to Google or DuckDuck or whatever, one of these search engines, and you search judgment, Christian judgment, you'll find that opinions run, the spectrum is massive. The far side, one far side is you should never judge, no matter what. And usually they also mean, that means you can have an opinion, but you can't share it. You need to be quiet. You can't speak the truth. No judging. And then there's, it's okay to judge as long as you're not being judgmental. Which again, what is judgmental versus judgment? It's just harsh judgment. It's okay to judge as long as you're not condemning. As long as you're not doing God's judging for him, right? Oh, they're going to hell because they don't believe X, Y, Z. Well, then it's okay to judge. And then there's some people that actually believe, there are people online, as long as you're speaking the truth, it's always okay. As long as you're being true, it's okay to judge. And now the page doesn't turn. So what does the Bible say? Is the next question. It actually has a lot to say. And this is part of the problem. This is one of the reasons why there's confusion, because we're going to go through 8 scriptures today. And if you look at these scriptures and you look at them just on a surface level, you look at them out of context, they seemingly contradict each other. They seemingly do. And judgment is a sort of a really complex topic. It's a touchy topic. And what we like to do as humans, our mind, we like to simplify things, right? We like to boil it down to something really simple. It's always okay to judge. It's never okay to judge. Or maybe, like I said, something in the middle, but just it has to be simple. It's okay to judge, but this one little thing. But how we approach judging, particularly when we're talking about judging within the body of a church, within the walls of Oak Stone, it actually is extremely important that we all think about it and be on the same page, because doing it wrong can have massive consequences. And it also has implications for how we spread the gospel. So I'm going to skip to the end here. The story I was talking about, this young lady that was offended, I didn't know. I just made a bold assumption that she was a Christian. She wasn't. All right, so you don't need to turn there. We're going to go through 8 scriptures pretty quickly. And then I'm going to deliberately take them mostly out of context. But we're going to come back and we're going to go through them again. But just to prove a point, I'm going to take these first 8 pretty rapid fire. And we got slides here. Matthew 7:1. Judge not, that you not be judged. That you be not judged. Okay, end of story. Shouldn't judge. Judge not. Matthew 18:15. Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Well, how do we know how can we determine that our brother sinned if we can't judge that it's a sin? And then we want to go to him? That seems pretty judgy. James 4:12. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another? Can't judge. And then what I love is the very next chapter of James 5. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. Wow. So how do we know if someone's wandering from the truth if we're not using some form of judgment? And then we have to go to them? Again, that seems pretty judgy. John 8:7. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Who's going to throw the first stone? Who's going to be who's going to throw it? Galatians 6:1. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, any sin, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Caught in a transgression. Well, how do we know? Do we have to judge to figure that out? And then we're supposed to go and, don't we all want to be spiritual? So doesn't this apply to all of us? 1 Corinthians 5, verse 11. But now I have written to you not to keep company with anyone named a brother who is sexually immoral, or covetous, or an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, not even to eat with such a person. For what have I to do with judging those also who are outside? Do you not judge those who are inside? And then John 7 and verse 24. This is the last one. This is Jesus Christ right here. Do not judge according to appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. Righteous judgment. So maybe this is like some kind of like a translation problem. Like maybe if we go back to the original Greek, this will all get cleared up, right? It's the same Greek word used, the verb and the noun, they're used all over the place. And I've looked at multiple translations for these verses. It basically conveys the same meaning. I don't think it's a translation problem. I've heard the argument, well, when these scriptures are in conflict like this, you shouldn't listen to James or Peter, Paul. You got to go back to what Christ actually said. Well, the very last thing we read was Jesus himself said, judge with righteous judgment. And he also said, judge not, lest you be judged. So which is it? If we try to apply binary thinking to this, we're going to be in big trouble. It's not one or the other. It's not yes or no. It turns out the context matters a ton here. And I don't just mean context in a particular passage, but I mean context in if you look at the whole New Testament, the gospel, the good news, what are these verses, how do they all fit together? Done with the slides for a second. And not just how do they fit together, but what is the intent behind these verses? What is God's heart on the matter? That to me is the real question. What is his heart? And can we find it? So there's two sort of bookend scriptures that I want to read before we go through the 8 again that really, I think, help frame the discussion, kind of give a broader context. So the first is Ephesians 4. I don't have these slides. If you want to turn there, you're welcome to. Ephesians 4 and verse 1. Ephesians 4:1. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love. Just pause for a second. Bearing with one another. If a church is perfect, you have to bear with one another. Endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, and one God and Father of all, who is above all, and through all, and in you all. So now just real quick, turn over to John 3:16. Everybody knows it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And this is the key verse. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn it, but that the world through him might be saved. So now let's go through these 8 again. And I'm going to start, there's two that I want to start with that I think help sort of set the tone. And that's James 5 and verse 16. James 5 and verse 16. Confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain. And it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of their ways will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. Now, back to back, let's go to Galatians 6 verse 1. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. So thinking about those 4 scriptures that we just read, humility, bearing one another's burdens, long suffering, God sent Christ here to not to condemn. He wants everyone to be saved. So what's the heart? If we acknowledge that we are all sinners, church is not supposed to be a place of self-righteousness. It's a place of healing. It's a place for restoration. Because the truth is, if we're honest, we're full of sin. We're full of it. But again, what's the goal? What is the goal? It's restoration. So now, thinking about judgment. Let's take Matthew 7:1 again, and let's read through this one more time. Judge not, that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with what measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove that speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. We do not like people being hypocritical. Forget church. Let's just go and say, hey, somebody comes that you know, a friend of yours, and they give you a piece of advice. Maybe they've got, whatever the advice is. They've got some new investment they want you to invest money in. Well, it turns out this guy lives paycheck to paycheck, and he's never saved a dime in his life. He's being a hypocrite. It doesn't work. So thinking about the overarching goal, back to the previous point. If the goal is restoration, if the goal is edification and building up the body, then why? This isn't going to work. If you approach someone in a hypocritical way, you're not going to restore them. You're actually going to make it worse. So hypocritical judgment. This passage is not about not judging. It's that when you do judge, you better be sure that you're not being a hypocrite, because it's human nature. We do not like it. Moving on to John 8. Slides right. John 8, verse 1. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had sat her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Don't know how that works, but now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But he stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear them. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but this woman, he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? And she said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Neither do I. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Now, this is a really fascinating story to me, and I think there's a lot of details that I would like to know. Like, the first question is, they caught this woman in the very act. Where's the guy? But the other thing that is interesting is that Jesus didn't rebuke them for bringing this woman. He didn't say, oh, she didn't sin. He even said at the end, go and sin no more. He just wasn't willing to condemn her. And he wasn't willing to allow anyone else to condemn her. Now, we don't hopefully stone people anymore. We have a justice system, and you could argue maybe that there's our modern day equivalent. But how quick are we to condemn people in our minds, in our hearts? I'm guilty of this. And how quickly are we sometimes to do God's judging for him? I get very uncomfortable when I hear Christians talking about other Christians as, well, they don't have this or that right, and they're not going to be in the kingdom or whatever. That makes me think of this passage. It's scary. And again, we go back to the overarching context. If the goal is restoration, what good is condemnation going to do? You're not restoring that person. You're condemning them. Okay, John 7 and verse 21. John 7:21. Jesus answered and said to them, I did one work, and you all marvel. Moses therefore gave you circumcision, not that it was from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath, so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. So easy. It's so easy to judge based on appearances. Thinking about the context, though, thinking about the goal within the church, if the goal is restoration, what good is judging on appearances? To me, when I read this, I think if you're judging on appearances, that means you don't actually understand the situation. You don't really know what's going on beneath the surface because you're just judging on what you see. Maybe you're making a snap judgment. Maybe you're not taking your time to really see the situation at hand. But again, if you do that, if the goal is restoration, it's not going to work because it's like being hypocritical and You go to someone and you make a snap judgment, you don't understand the situation, and you criticize, it won't work. So what I love about, we're only through 4, but these are very practical, right? These are very practical in how we think about approaching our brother. Matthew 18:15. Matthew 18:15. Moreover, if a brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained a brother. But if he will not hear you, take with you 1 or 2 more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses to even hear the church, let him be like a heathen and a tax collector. So this Matthew 18:15 is really establishing sort of a framework for how we deal with sin in the church. But there's a couple of interesting things about it. First of all, everything else still applies, right? So if we're going to go to our brother with some sin, we better be really sure that that's a sin. We better be really sure that that's a sin. And notice, if he doesn't hear you, then you take 2 or 3 witnesses. 1 or 2. And these witnesses, part of the role is to establish that really is sin. Because we need to be very careful about making sure that what we're calling sin is sin. It's from here, and it's not just some personal vendetta or doctrine or whatever. And something that has happened before in churches, they try to follow this model, but there's division. There's already division in the church. So you got group over here, you got group over here. Well, if someone from over here goes to this group, and they say, oh, you sinned, this XYZ. And then they don't hear it. So then I go back and I get a couple of my buddies that already agree with me. If the goal is restoration, relationships matter. Go and find people that this guy respects, that he'll listen to. Not just trying to win an argument, because it won't work. Again, this is just extremely practical wisdom that God has given us that is so easy to get twisted. It's like, I don't think these work, but an alcoholic's intervention. Hey, we've got this family member and we're going to have an intervention on him and we're going to try to straighten him out. Well, normally you get your family together, people that he respects, people that he loves and they love, everybody loves, so that you can have some impact. You don't just randomly go and get people he doesn't know or doesn't respect. What good is it? It's no good. All right, and not finally, we're getting there. James 4 and verse 11. James 4:11. Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and destroy. Who are you to judge another? So the way this is constructed, it's a little bit confusing, and I read a few commentaries, and the commentators have spilled a lot of ink trying to explain this passage. But the context is speaking evil, slander, gossip. In the law, it's against the law, God's law, to slander. But again, if you think about the overarching goal, if the goal is restoration, the goal is to gain a brother, follow the Matthew 18 model and go to your brother. Instead, I go to Mark, and I start talking bad about him, maybe I'm slandering, gossiping. Am I working towards restoration or further division? It just tears down. It doesn't build up. And now, finally, 1 Corinthians 5. 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 1. It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and such sexual immorality as is not even named among the Gentiles, that a man has his father's wife. And you are puffed up, you're proud. and you have not mourned, you're not repentant, that he who has done this deed might be taken away from among you. For I indeed, as absent in the body but present in spirit, have already judged, as though I were present, him who has done this deed. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, when you are gathered together along with my spirit, with the power of our Lord Jesus Christ, deliver such a one to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord Jesus. Your glorying is not good. It's hard to read between. It's not hard to read between the lines. It seems like I don't know if it was this one individual or this church, but they're glorying about this sin. They're boasting. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Therefore, purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you are truly unleavened. For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, not with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I wrote to you in my epistle not to keep company with sexually immoral people. Yet I did not certainly mean the sexually immoral people of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or idolaters, since then you would need to go out of the world. But now I have written you not to keep company with anyone named a brother who is sexually immoral, covetous, an idolater, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, not even to eat with such a person. For what have I to do with judging those who are outside? Do you not judge those who are inside? But those who are outside, God judges. So no spirit of repentance. The person's puffed up. They're not repentant. You know, you think about the verse we read earlier, James 5:16, confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another. If someone is openly sinning, it makes it kind of hard to confess, right? Your sins, if they're proud of what they're doing. You know, we all sin. If we're honest, we're full of it, full of sin. Maybe full of something else too. But it's a very rare occasion for me to get on Facebook and someone say, hey everyone, I just cheated on my taxes. I cheated Caesar out of some money. We're ashamed if it's not, even non-believers are ashamed when they know they did something wrong. So this passage is, again, the goal is restoration. And it's very hard to have restoration when someone is openly sinning. They're not repenting. I want to read verse 12 again because I think this is instructive. Verse 12, for what have I to do with judging those who are outside? Do you not judge those who are inside? But those who are outside, God judges. Therefore, put away from yourselves the evil person. So everything before those two scriptures, verses, that's the word I'm looking for. Everything before that, everything has been in the context of within the church, right? Restoration. We want to restore our brother. We want to build each other up. It's within the context, within the confines of the church. But when you talk about people that are out in the world, non-Christians, can you restore someone that's never been a Christian? They've never committed? How can you restore someone that was never here to begin with? So the concept of, again, the goal, restoration. How do you restore someone that was never here? You can't. And I'm not trying to say, by the way, that you can't speak the truth. But it does say that God judges those who are outside. And so for me, the way I approach it, there's a lot of people that say they're Christian. There's a lot of people, I just assume everyone isn't, unless you're here, unless I know you, unless you're a brother. But if you're not, I just assume that you're not. And if you think from the perspective of spreading the gospel, fulfilling the Great Commission, it's really counterproductive, actually, to try to restore, to try to judge those who are outside. Because they don't accept the foundation. They don't believe that God. Some don't believe that God exists or that this is the truth. So to start with, well, hey, I know you don't believe in any of this, but you're breaking the seventh commandment. Again, it's not going to work. So going back to my story, in a moment of anger, I kind of went off on this small group, and I regret it, and I've repented of it many times because I think about these things. It's funny how, like, when you do something you know is wrong, you just have to let it go, and I know that God has forgiven me. But I'm going off on this tangent about this DJ, and I couldn't see the forest from the trees. This young lady was not a professing Christian. And I later found out that she lived with her boyfriend. So here I am. It wasn't about the DJ. I'm going on and on about sin and immorality. I am insulting her. Now, was I speaking the truth? Yes. But what I wish I had said, if I could go back, I wish I could have said, this DJ, he was making fun of this Christian, and it really hurt me because she was just trying to do what she thought was right. She was trying to follow God's law. That's what I'm just trying to do the best I can do. And for me, I found that God's law, in a lot of cases, it actually mirrors natural law. And that if you follow God's law, natural law, you'll benefit. I don't have to worry about STDs. I don't have to worry about pregnancy. I don't have to worry about the emotional baggage that comes with sleeping around. And just last week, 2 weeks ago, not 20 years ago, 2 weeks ago, but 2 weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal came out with an article. It was a study was done. And traditionally, the statistics show that the earlier you get married in life, the higher the divorce rate will be. So you get married at 18, you've got a much higher likelihood of getting divorced, whereas if you get married at 30. It kind of levels off in your 30s. Here's what they found, which I thought was fascinating. They went back and they looked at all the data and they said, if you got married young and had not cohabitated first, if you hadn't lived with someone when you got married, you had a higher likelihood of staying together than anyone else. Age doesn't matter. You cohabitate, there's a natural law. You're going to pay the price. I don't know if I would have said that to this lady, this woman. But there's a difference between, hey, you are in violation, you are sinning, you need to ship up or shape out. Is that the?
Shape up. Shape out.
I should have known better. There's a difference between telling someone their sins and coming up alongside them and sharing your experiences, sharing why you keep God's law, why you profess to be Christ's, why you do what you do. Because, again, God judges those outside. So just as a quick summary, for our brothers and sisters in the church, the intent has to be restoration, love, and never with a holier thou attitude. We should always remember that whatever measure we use, God will use that for us. Jesus wasn't sent here to condemn, so we shouldn't either. We should never judge on appearances. We should only judge when we are certain, when the sin has been firmly established and it's biblically sound. We should never slander or gossip against a brother. Again, always think about the intent. The intent is restoration, love, edification. And for those outside the church, we should just try not to judge, because we can't restore them. Instead, we should try to show them a better way. Try to spread the gospel, fulfill the Great Commission. Praise God.